Just when you thought this franchise couldn't get more biblical with its allegory of Caesar as Jesus, enter Noah and the Great Flood.
What we do?
Hey everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and I am so excited to be telling you about Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Those film titles are always big tongue twisters, but really it isn't about the titles of these films. It's about what's inside, what is on the screen. And fortunately for this franchise, this is one of the most consistent franchises, especially as of late, starting with 2011 with Rise of the Planet of the Apes, going to Dawn, then War, and now here at Kingdom. This is kind of its own little film quadrilogy, if you will, even though there is a larger franchise at large. But a little bit of a spoiler alert, a little bit of a naughty little secret for you. I've never seen any of the original Planet of the Apes movies. I started in 2011 with Rise. I saw War. I saw Dawn in the middle there, and I've seen Kingdom now, but I've never really gone back to watch the originals. So this is probably one of those shame on me moments where everyone in the comment section is saying, Dylan, what the F are you doing? So I plan on watching the original Planet of the Apes as part of my podcast series. Wait, Dylan's never seen that? So I will be remedying that issue next month on that podcast, so fret not. But this is a series of movie reviews, summer catch-up reviews, and this is one of actually the first films I saw this summer, so I'm surprised it's taken me this long to finally get to it and get to talking about it, but that's why we have this summer catch-up, so I can tell you about movies I love, like Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, which I'll say right now is not just one of my favorite films of the summer, it's one of my favorite movies of the year, and it's one of my favorite movies of this franchise, and I think this franchise had such big shoes to fill, especially after Matt Reeves took his shoes off after the last few films. A lot of people weren't sure, was Wes Ball, the director of this, going to fit those shoes? And it's very interesting because Wes Ball, really pretty much primarily known for the Maze Runner series, which again wasn't a total flop of a series, but not one that people talk about a lot. I think a lot of people have reverence for the first Maze Runner, but I don't hear anyone talking about the subsequent films, even though I kind of like those films. I think they're totally fine for what they are. But it's never really occurred to me that, the Maze Runner and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, they do something really well, which is creating the sense of atmosphere that is both futuristic in a way. It's obviously set in the future, but there's so much of our own visual imagery that we're able to kind of connect with based on the familiarity of some surroundings, which I think for a franchise like Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, or Planet of the Apes at large, I should say, is really nice to see, because there always is that constant blending of our real world with this fantasy world. And I think that's why this franchise has succeeded as well as it has, especially in this revitalized era of Planet of the Apes, because we do see so much of the familiar in it. In the first three films, it quite literally deals with this battle between ape and human, and they do talk about it again in this film, obviously, but this is set decades and decades later than the previous three films. But it really has been about that kind of blend between humanity and these apes and what we have to say about society at large. And a lot of the imagery that I've loved so much is coming from this kind of deteriorating sense of present, and how in the future the skyscrapers and the artifice is still there. It's just kind of overwhelmed with all this like shrubbery and green. And I think you get a little bit of that in the Maze Runner too. It's like a world that is distinctly different, but still familiar at the same time. And I think the same is true here. So I think Wes Ball is actually a really smart choice, if Matt Reeves didn't want to come back, to kind of evolve this franchise, because he does have that strength of making that kind of future feel still familiar while also distant enough to give us this kind of really interesting middle ground to play with, where the audience can both feel like it is a foreign thing, but also a familiar thing all at once. So I just want to say first off the bat, Wes Ball, I think the design of this thing nails it out of the park. And I think the design is something that a lot of people can expect from Planet of the Apes to be very strong, and not just in these settings and the surroundings and the way they use the architecture and all of the cityscape, or the forest in this case as well, because there's a lot of green in this thing. The movie opens with this kind of like bird colony where it's all forest, it's all trees. That's all really great, but the apes themselves have always been such a highlight of this kind of new era and reckoning of Planet of the Apes, is because the digital technology since 2011, but especially since the 60s when this franchise first started, has evolved so much. I mean, you go back to those older films, and I haven't seen them, as I admitted, my dirty little secret at the top of this review, but you see stills of that thing, you see clips of that thing. I've seen some clips from those movies, and the apes from then till now just look so much more evolved. And I think that's also something to be said about the themes of this franchise in general, and how franchises and films and technology evolve as well. And I love to see those parallels there. But I just think the CGI and how they're able to create those faces and those expressions and use the mocap to make us truly convinced that these are animals, these are apes, but they also have these very human like emotions and facial expressions. It really is one of the most marvelous things to look at over the past decade in terms of visual effects. And I know every single year these movies are up against giant juggernauts. I mean, 2011, it was up against Hugo, Rise of the Planet of the Apes. So, like, I get it. Hugo, Martin Scorsese was doing a lot for 3D technology. So I get it. That probably would have been the one where I go Rise over Hugo. I just think Rise of the Planet of the Apes, first off, very underrated film. I feel like now everyone talks about Dawn, everyone talks about War, people are talking about Kingdom, but I feel like Rise doesn't always get its due because it's the origin story. It's setting things up. But I think how it sets things up is very, very amazing. And honestly, if I go back to watch these, I think Rise is the one I rewatch the most because it is also one of the more palatable ones. I think Dawn and War are so dense that almost they have no levity to them, where I think Rise still has that because you also have that really great human story. Then we move on to Dawn, and Dawn's special effects loses to Interstellar. We just talked about it in the 2014 retrospective. I understand. Interstellar is literally creating black holes out of just a mere imagination, and it's Christopher Nolan at his biggest and grandest thus far. So I get that loss. I get why Dawn didn't win. But I think those Dawn of the Planet of the Apes characters are so intriguing. Koba, especially. I think the Koba Caesar dynamic is what makes Dawn so great. Even though I have gone on the record saying it is actually my least favorite of this newer iteration, which is again going to get a lot of hates in the comments. I'm so sorry about it. I really look at these almost equally, all four of these films, but I do think Dawn, because it is the most action heavy, and that's not necessarily the most interesting part of these movies for me. It's more about the psychological, the sci-fi, and I do think the human characters in Dawn are just not as interesting as the ones in War or Rise. Then we get to War, which is a really interesting film. I mean, the way it kind of becomes a prison drama, the characters in that thing, the human characters especially, are so intriguing and despicable, but also interestingly explored. But also what Caesar brings, this is really the full like Jesus film, if you're gonna kind of make those biblical parallels, where Caesar kind of comes into his full form as his Jesus Messiah-like figure. But again, that film loses to Blade Runner 2049, which again makes a lot of sense. Blade Runner, one of the most technically marvelous films of the last few years. So I feel like every time these movies are like coming up to bat and they have the bat in their hands and they hit that beautiful like ground rule double, then another film comes up and just hits a home run, which is really terrible to see for this franchise that does deserve an Oscar for its visual effects. Maybe this is the year it'll finally happen. I think the path to victory is going to be hard with Dune Part 2 in the way, but I do think, again, these visual effects have been hitting time after time after time. And while Hugo and Interstellar and Blade Runner are obviously very welcome winners, I do hope this franchise eventually gets its due. But it looks like we're going to keep getting these movies for at least the next few years, I would hope. I think there's at least 2 more installments to make to continue this plot trajectory. So I'm really excited to hopefully see it get its due. But the visual effects have always just been a highlight. And I think it's a reason why people keep coming back to this thing, because they want to see these apes and their evolution, not just in the character and in the narrative and in the story and in the personalities, but also individual effects, and seeing how, just looking at 2011 side by side to here, just to see how much they've grown just in that short amount of time, but especially looking at like 1968's Planet of the Apes with this modern iteration, it's quite stunning to see. And like I said, I think Wes Ball, because of the Maze Runner, the post-apocalyptic nature of it, but also still making it feel like our world, is a really great fit for this thing. And while he doesn't necessarily go as distinctly, altruistic with it as like Matt Reeves does, I still think he brings a lot of great artistic flair to it, and also allowing for stillness, which I think is important. I mean, the film follows this character, Noah, who essentially cares for these birds, and you get a lot of time spent just at this bird colony, seeing how their everyday lives kind of work on a daily basis. And then when something happens to that colony, he goes searching for answers. And what those answers lead to is this kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. It's the title itself, which is ruled by this one kind of conqueror, played by Kevin Durand in a exceptional role, exceptional performance, a really haunting one, probably the scariest performance of these mocap Planet of the Apes performances since Toby Kebbell played Koba and Dawn for the Planet of the Apes. But Kevin Durand just eats up the scenery here, chews it all. But meanwhile, on the way, Noah comes across the character Raka, who he befriends, who kind of gives him a lot of wisdom into the past of this franchise and this legacy of Caesar, essentially kind of aiding as an audience aid to kind of the past and the thinking of Caesar and what Caesar's legacy means with this whole thing. And then he comes across Nova, who is a human. And there's a very interesting kind of good dinosaur thing going on where the apes speak, but the humans do not. But this human is a little bit different. And again, it explores that kind of ape human divide. But the greatness of this film is that, like I said, it's given so much room to breathe, so much room to like kind of philosophize. That's not a real word, but it is now. But they get to really just kind of ponder all these themes and all these religious undertones, which is again kind of something I alluded to earlier. The fact that the last film was basically this big kind of send off for Caesar as this big biblical Jesus like film. And now, how do you follow it up? How do you continue this franchise and evolve it? And I think the most genius decision was to set this generations in the future. And instead of continuing Caesar's story, you follow a whole new story, but use Caesar's legacy as the kind of strength of the themes kind of supporting the story. And what is so powerful about this is that this film shows how Caesar's kind of messaging and legacy and religion, in a way, has kind of tainted this modern civilization and these apes in the future, and how these apes are kind of misconstruing history to kind of fit their own narrative. And I think that's a very, very prominent and polarizing theme to be taking on in 2024, when people tend to be kind of misrepresenting religion to make it convenient to them, and misunderstanding some of the teachings and the lessons and the proverbs and the words of wisdom that the Bible or religion, or any religion really, can have to offer. And while I am not the most religious person, there are certainly people I'm connected to who are much more religious than I am. I think I can understand that religion should be used as something uplifting. It should be our way of connecting to the world spiritually, if that is what you choose to believe. And some people aren't religious, some people are, but I do think there is something to be said about people in this world who take the Bible or take, their religious beliefs and kind of get the wrong message from it and feel like they can, ostracize others, or thinking that the Bible says this when in reality it doesn't say this. I mean, we see a lot of that in modern politics, but also just in modern conversations as well. The fact that we have so many divides in the world, a lot of it stems from this idea of, well, the Bible says this or the Bible says that. And I think there's a very nuanced conversation to be had about religion, and like, what really is religion, and what does it say about us and about humanity, and what lessons should we be taking from it? And I'm not here to tell you what you should interpret religion to be for you, because I think it should be different person to person, but I do think it should overall be striving toward unity, and unity in one's own connection to whatever they believe in, or whatever the universe around them is, even if they are not believing in a god or a god-like figure or religion, just whatever you believe in terms of your just everyday morals and beliefs, your own code, what that is. And I think it's so interesting because we've followed Caesar now for 3 films, and we know that Caesar stood for good, but it is so fascinating that decades later and generations later, these characters have retracted into something that is totally different than what Caesar believed. But because it has gone through many generations and retellings, what they believe in, they think is owing it to their god, to Caesar, but in reality, what they're doing is very, very harmful and very dangerous and pretty misguided. And I think that's just such a brilliant, 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 brilliant way to evolve a franchise. Instead of retreading the same old beats and same old story and following a character, they could have easily Disneyfied this thing and brought Caesar back from the dead. Turns out he didn't die after all, or it's just going to follow Caesar's son and it's going to be the same exact thing. Instead, we go so far into the future to where the whole world has kind of misconstrued what Caesar's belief was in the first place. And I think it's such a great modern parallel to how people kind of abuse religion to kind of fit their own narratives and make their own choices and justify some of their poor choices. Now, I think this is a beautiful film to kind of remind us what religion can be in a powerful sense, but also what it could be in a dangerous sense if people get the wrong messages from it, and how people sometimes use religion to become a weapon of sorts, to use to advocate for bad behavior in a way. And I think it's just such a nuanced tale. And like I'm saying, I'm not trying to preach my own religion or my own beliefs on anyone here. This is not what this review is made to do, but more so to recognize that this is something that people do in the modern world, in our society at large. They misconstrue certain things, certain beliefs, and that is exactly what this film does too. It's about how characters are trying to reckon with, the generations that set forth their world before them, and whether or not those lessons that they are trying to preach and trying to adhere to are the things that our ancestors really did intend for us to, latch onto. And I just think that's some of the most brilliant stuff in it. And On top of that, it has great visuals. It has great world building. Like I said, there's so much room to breathe. The sequences where Noah and Raka are just talking, and Raka's just sharing all these words of wisdom about Caesar, the positive words of wisdom about Caesar. And then when you even get to the kingdom, you would expect it to just start like hitting the ground running with all its action, but it doesn't. It takes time to breathe. There's a lot of meetings just between characters sitting around and talking. And while a lot of films about characters sitting around and talking could be very boring, this film, I feel like every conversation, because it has all that subtext, all that juicy, meaty subtext about religion and just these really interesting mixed messages, I think it makes for such engaging and intriguing drama to where then when the action comes, it feels earned. It feels like we've actually done the growth and we've done the arcs and we've done a lot of the interesting introspective work to then kind of hit with a grand finale and promise things for the action crowd, the ones who want to go see the movies for the action, for the spectacle. We really can see kind of the best of both worlds there, but the action doesn't feel like it's, totally separated from the thematic work either. It feels like it's a really great conjunction, a great marriage. So Planet of the Apes, Kingdom of Planet of the Apes is one of my new favorites of the year, as I said. It's really hard to rank these films because I think they're so close. But as I've said, Rise is probably like my favorite just because it's the one I enjoy watching the most. I think it has some really great human moments as well. And the actual like advocacy for animal rights in that film is really impactful, I think. But Kingdom, I think right now, I really don't know where it would be, but it kind of could, I think, someday become my favorite Planet of the Apes film, at least the modern iteration of it. Again, I haven't seen the original. I plan on doing that very soon. But I really think these films are just so consistent because they do keep trying to evolve past just the same old repeated formula time and time again. There are certain beats they all hit, but I think all in all, every single film feels distinctly different from the next. Rise does not feel like Dawn, does not feel like War, does not feel like Kingdom. And I think that's really refreshing in a modern studio lens when you see so many films that feel like, you know, what is the difference between Despicable 2, 3, and 4? I really couldn't tell you the nuances, There are differences in the stories, but all in all, they kind of feel distinctly samey in a way. Whereas these ones feel distinctly unique and different and, diverse. And I think even the directors that they bring in, they have some similar stylings, but they also still feel distinctly different as directing pieces as well. And performances. Owen Teague is really great as Noah. He doesn't have the same gravitas, I think, that Andy Serkis does, but he's a totally different character, so he doesn't need to. I think Freya Allen as Nova is a character I really want to see more of. Peter Macon as Raka, just such a warm, cuddly, beautiful, and just such a inviting character. And then Kevin Durant, as I said, as Proximus Caesar, is just so menacing and scary, but also has this charisma that you want to lean in. You want to hear what he's going to say next, which makes him a very interesting character because there are a lot of rulers like that are dangerous people, but we still want to lean in and hear what they have to say because we're so provoked by it. We're so haunted by it in a way. So so good. This movie's so good. I love it so much. I really don't have many critiques. The only critiques I can think of is that maybe the final act is a little less nuanced and intellectual than the first two, and I think it does a lot of setup for sequels. But again, when you have something good on your hands and you want to expand the story further without feeling like you have to wrap it up with a bow tightly, I don't mind that there's some open-endedness at the end of this thing. I don't mind that there's a little bit of a cliffhanger for some avenues. It does still feel like it's complete film, but it is going to have that kind of like we're opening it up to a sequel type deal. But again, I think these films have all proven now, all four of these newer iterations, that they can work really well to where I think the film studio has confidence that there's going to be plenty more of these movies to come as long as they keep making money, which this one obviously has. So that is my review for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Let me know down below what you think of them. What do you think of the CGI? Do you think this one is going to finally win the Oscar? Or do you think Dune Part 2 has got that Oscar in the bag? Or is something else going to come by? Maybe Mufasa? I don't know. And what do you think of this film in the context with the other ones? I would love you to share your rankings down below without spoiling those old films because I'm going to go back to them soon. And let me know what you thought of this film as well as some of the other summer films that you want to see me review. We're only halfway through the month. We still got another half of the month to go with movie reviews. Stay tuned. Friday is going to be another great one for you. I won't tell you what it is because I don't really know what it is yet. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you then. Please like, comment, subscribe, and have a good one, y'all. Stay safe. Thanks.